Before we commence, would like to remind all our panelists who are going to join us on the stage that each session is going to be of 1 hour, which is inclusive of the Q&A round. Our very first session is on the topic, what makes India an interesting destination for the rest of the world? For this, we have an eminent panel representing different sectors of the industry who would be deliberating on smart cities, Make in India, goods and services tax, labor and land reforms. This session is being chaired by Mr. Arun Maira, former member of the Planning Commission of India, and would now like to invite Mr. Arun Maira on the stage, please. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Arun Maira, who would be moderating our very first panel discussion. Joining him on stage, we have an eminent panel of speakers. Shri Shankar Aggarwal, Secretary, Ministry of Labour and Employment, Government of India. Mr. R.C. Bhargava, Chairman, Maruti. Mr. C.P. Gurnani, CEO and MD, Tech Mahindra. And Mr. Ashok Reddy, Managing Director and Co-founder, Teamlease. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them a huge round of applause. Our very first panel, and surely promises to be really invigorating. And I now hand over the floor to the moderator of the session, Mr. Arun Maira.
Good morning again, everyone. Good morning. And I welcome the panel who's been introduced to you already. This is the first panel in this very important conference. The conference is on employment. It's the World Employment Conference. And the subject for this panel is what makes India an interesting destination for the rest of the world, bringing in an industry viewpoint. The question, therefore, is India an interesting place for industry to base itself? India is incredible, and the slogan, Incredible India, has made India very attractive for tourists. The commotion of India, the beaches of India, the festivals of India, the history of India, the tigers of India, make India very interesting, incredible for tourists. But industry perhaps doesn't want India to be that chaotic, that crowded, for it to do business. So what makes India interesting for industry? Industry looks for markets. Industry looks for places to produce competitively. Is India a good market for industry? Is India a good place for industry to produce? The size of India's population and its demographics, also the fact that we are indeed at the moment a poor country, make India a very interesting market. The size and the potential growth of consumption in this country makes India perhaps one of the largest potential markets in the world today. But for Indian citizens to become consumers, to become that large market, they'll have to earn incomes. And therefore, we need our citizens to have jobs, to earn. Otherwise, the market growth will be very slow. Henry Ford, in the last century, at the start of the last century, startled his competitors and colleagues in the automotive industry in the United States by doubling, or more than that, the wages that he agreed to pay his workers compared to the rest of the industry. And his competitors thought that he was spoiling the market and that he was indeed mad. But he said, to be able to sell more cars, we must have people who earn enough to be able to buy the cars. So I intend to increase wages to enable people to earn more. Of course, he had an innovation in the production method, the assembly line, with which he could keep the costs down, even though workers were being paid very much more. And of course, the rest, as they say, is history, and with the Model T and the growth of the market for cars in the United States, as also increased levels of incomes of workers, blue-collar workers, and the standards of living in the United States. Is India an interesting place to produce things? A smart, sustainable strategy for any industry in a competitive world is to build your advantage, your process of production and your advantage on the resource that you have much more of than others may have. If you are in Saudi Arabia and you wish to be dominating the market for hydrocarbons, you will keep building your prowess in the refinement of petroleum which comes from under the ground, and you will try to shut out people who are developing technologies to extract energy from shale oil, for example. So if you are in India and wish to produce competitively, what is the source of energy that you should base your technology on, your production methods on? I say it would have to be the vast pool of people available in this country. Now, just like in oil, it doesn't come out of the ground in a usable fashion. The technology is how to extract it and how to refine it to make it usable. And similarly, the energy in our people is latent. We, as industry, have to be smart at how to extract that energy, to refine it, and to make it our asset, our competitive advantage. Our means anybody who wishes to produce in India, whether you are from elsewhere and wish to use India as your competitive advantage, or your Indian companies and want to do the same. So our business strategies in India, I say, should be based on engaging more human resources and converting them into our source of competitive advantage. We have an excellent panel, and I guess you'll discover very soon why, because they have insights which will be very valuable for all of us in how you could help the Staffing Federation, industry, Indian and people coming from elsewhere, to develop the most productive enterprises, most competitive enterprises in the world. I'd like to begin with you, Mr. Bhargava. Maruti Suzuki is perhaps the most successful joint venture in India since the economic reforms of the 1990s. And you have been associated with it since its inception. India has got a lot out of it, both on the market side, the availability of very good cars for our people, as also on the production side, the technologies that India have learned in Maruti, as well as the suppliers to Maruti. I want to ask you, what is the role that Indian talent has played, management talent, as well as workman talent in the success of this venture?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Maira. When this company was created in 1981, and then we signed up with Suzuki in 1982 and started production in 1983, we were a public sector undertaking. At that time, the managing director was Mr. Krishnamurthy, and I was the other part of the management. There was nobody else. I was heading the marketing function. One of the decisions we took was that we did not want to go the public sector way if we were to make a success of this industry, which at that time had two private players in it. And so it was a competitive situation with the private sector. At the same time, we realized that being a public sector company, we had to work within the public sector system. We had to follow all the rules, regulations which were laid down by the public, for the public sector, and therefore we had to find our solutions within the public sector system. Because we had a Japanese partner, we tried to learn from them as to how Japan transformed its industry after the war. And from a country which was known for making slipshod goods, selling only on the basis of price, they had become the most competitive manufacturing country in the world. And the answer was, sir, what you said a little while back, people. It was people who enabled Japanese industry to become the most competitive manufacturing industry, despite the fact that Japan had no natural resources, no sources of energy, and their markets were several thousand kilometers away because they had to export about half of what they produced in order to pay for the imported raw materials. They did this by communicating and educating their workers and making them believe that the workers' own aspirations and goals could be best met if they believed that the company was their route to that goal. If the company prospered, the workers would prosper. If the company went bankrupt, the workers would lose their jobs. And it was this mutual interdependence between the interests of the workers and of their company which led to Japanese success. So we decided that if we were to be different from others in India and if we were to compete, then we would follow the same route and win the success of the workers, win the confidence of the workers, and which would lead to success. Because the issue is not only of using human resources in India, it is of skilling them, motivating them, so that the same people produce continuously increasing productivity, lower costs, and better quality. So human resources are the route to getting to that place. We framed all our policies, did all our actions consistent with that object of winning the workers' confidence and of convincing them that their interest lay in working for the good of the company, believing that the company was their company and they were partners or co-owners of that company. This meant regular communication. It meant total transparency in all our actions. And amongst the transparency, one of the important things we decided right at the beginning was that there would be no cash transactions of any kind in the company. Because one of the things which loses workers' confidence in the management and the balance sheets is the belief that a lot of money is siphoned out of the company. So this actions of ours continued. It took time because workers were new, they had come fresh from the villages, but over time they were totally convinced that their future lay with the company. They believed in the management. Our policies were consistent with that. And I'll just give you some figures to show how this has worked for us. In 1986-87, the value added per employee was 335,000 rupees per person. 94-95, this had increased to 1.07 million, 10 lakhs, 10.7 lakhs. 2004-05, another 10 years later, it was 34.49 lakhs or 3.45 million per employee. 14-15, it was 6.1 million per employee. So about 20 times increase in the value added per employee in a period of roughly 30 years. I don't think it's happened anywhere else in industry, and I say that this has only happened because of what we could do to motivate the workers, and if the workers are convinced that their interest lies in the company, they can make the most competitive manufacturing possible. How did the workers gain out of this? Today, a worker who has spent 22 years in the company, his cost to the company on an average, this is an average figure, it's not the minimum or the maximum, but this is for people at about 22 years, is about 88,000 rupees per month per worker. Those who are more senior, who are 34 years, are at 1.09 lakhs, 109,000 rupees per worker per month. Many of the workers have become supervisors. A supervisor who has had 25 years of service in the company, a large part of that as a worker, today is 116,000 rupees per month. Those who have been 35 years in the company are 235,000 rupees per employee per month in the company. They all started at a cost to the company of under 2,000 rupees. So that is the kind of growth which has taken place, and they have completely realized that what we convinced them in the beginning about their interest was actually true. What has happened to the company? We started with a company which was supposed to produce 100,000 cars a year. Today, we have a capacity of 1.5 million cars a year, 15 times. All the expansion has happened from the internal resources of the company. We have not borrowed money at all. In addition to this, we have cash reserves of about $3 billion. The market capitalization of Maruti today is 50% higher than the market capitalization of the parent company, Suzuki Japan. We are in a position and have been in a position for some time to export to large parts of the world, including Europe. This year, we have started exporting to Japan. The point I'm trying to make, sir, is that India has the capability of producing conditions where the people will produce the highest quality, achieve the highest levels of productivity, continue to make continuous improvements. It requires the management to win their confidence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maruti is certainly amongst the most inspiring story of the growth of Make in India in manufacturing. An industry which has put India on the global stage is our information technology industry. It's become the poster boy of the emergence of India in the modern globalized world. Mr. Gurnani, Tech Mahindra, one of the stars in our IT industry, I want to ask you, well, the success of your company and the companies in your industry is entirely based on the human resources of India. In fact, in your industry, one might say that 9/10 of the competitive advantage lay not so much in smart management, but just in the quality of the people that the management could have access to in India. The basis of competition in your industry are now changing towards intellectual property and products. And going forward, CP, do you see Indian people continuing to be a source of competitive advantage, and what are you doing to nurture it?
Arun, clearly, when you look at the success story of Maruti and an excellent narration by Mr. Bhargava, and he is one person who's clearly an authority to say that we were zero in car manufacturing. Our legacy was probably an ambassador or a Fiat. From that to become a net exporter, from that to be able to engineer a car, to be able to design a car, to be able to reduce the cycle time, to produce a car, and which is a very, very complex set of machinery. I think in a lot of ways I can draw parallels to the Indian IT industry. Reality is that Indian IT industry grew on the basis that we have the intellectual capital, but somebody else will make an intellectual product out of it. That Indian IT industry grew, that, because the people could not go always to the place of work, we will bring work to where the people is. Indian IT industry grew on the fundamental fact is that we had the raw capital of humans and we had a globalized workforce which was willing to participate in the economies of 100 plus countries around the world. Now, as we go along, we clearly know that this industry has continued to grow. That this year, the size of the industry is about $150 billion. It accounts for almost 38% of the Indian exports. That out of this 150 billion of the industry is really backed by 3.5 million people. And that these 3.5 million people impact not only, this is not about 3.5 million jobs, it is how they impact the ecosystem. The reality is the largest refinery or the largest plant that Mr. Bhargava will set up will still be talking of a few thousand people. And whereas this industry, we still talk about, despite of all the changes that Arun was talking about, we still talk of hiring hundreds of thousands of people. So if I were to go back and, relate to what Honorable Minister just said about the Make in India program, to me, Make in India is actually the services industry. To me, the Make in India is the IT sector, because this is the only place where, with a proper environment, and as we change, we will be able to bring in some very, very high quality products. We are already moved up in the value chain. You've seen that how Indian industry has responded to the internet commerce. How technology companies, every Uber is having a tough time by an Ola, every Amazon is having a tough time by Flipkart. And all of this is powered by the technology developed by Indians. So as we lead into the consumption-led society, as we grow more into pay-per-user society, as we move from CapEx to OpEx, I am very, very sure that Indian IT industry will continue to adopt and will continue to flourish.
Thank you very much. So, India is the best country in the world if you want to grow a world-class, maybe world-scale service industry. India is a great country to produce goods, cars, sophisticated products. Here are two great examples. Shankar here on my right and myself, we go back a long way, actually. We served together in a company called Tata's, Telco, Tata Engineering at that time, and locomotive company, then became Tata Motors. At the time that we were there, we had a challenge, which was to compete with Japanese producers coming into the country with light commercial vehicles. And we were required by the government of India to compete with them without importing any technology, any machines, and any tools. To be able to compete with them, we had to therefore, using Indian people only, Indian talent, design a complete new product, new engine, new everything, in a period which would be less than 2 years, when the world record was 4 years, the Japanese, in new product development. And Shankar, you remember, it was done. Indian talent, motivated, like you said, to say, we have it in us, Give us the environment and management, encourage us, enable us, and we will do it. It was done. And so, yes, Tata Motors created a new industry of the light commercial vehicles in this country, as Maruti did for cars. So I know your beliefs about the power of Indian people. Now, Shankar, industry leaders, I hear say, and you hear say, often say, that India is a very difficult place to do business because of its labor laws. Because Maruti works in the labor laws, and so did Tata's, and so the IT industry. But things must keep changing and improving, surely. And there's demand from industry for more flexibility, which is often expressed as making it easier for industry to fire people. On the other hand, employees and unions demand fairness. And it seems to be a context of flexibility versus fairness, whereas it should be flexibility and fairness. So what are your views about this? And what is government doing to improve the industrial relations climate to combine flexibility with fairness?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. First of all, let me express my deepest regard for Mr. Maira. He was my boss when I started my career way back in 1979 in Telco Pune. And I learned a lot, though I was not directly reporting to him, but I learned a lot from him. And Mr. Bhargava, though I again never worked with him, but he's from my cadre, and he used to be an ideal when we joined the services. And we still draw a lot of inspiration from you and your good work, sir. Having said that, today's topic is how India is an interesting place for industry to invest. So I'll come to that a little later, but let me take you back to 1947 when we got the independence. In 1947, the biggest challenge before us at that point of time was the form of governance we adopted. And we adopted a very beautiful institution of governance called democracy. A lot of people had a lot of doubts about the functioning of democracy in this country because this country was neither very prosperous and large number of people were quite illiterate. But we went ahead and adopted a democracy, and today we are not only the largest democracy in the world, we are the most thriving and the vibrant democracy in the world. And all our elections are free and fair, and we change our government in a very, very smooth and hassle-free manner. The second challenge before us was the security of the nation. We did have a problem in the beginning, first in 1948 and then in 1962. But thereafter, we pulled up our socks. And today, we are truly a very, very strong nation. And no nation in the world can ignore us anywhere at any point of time. And the credit goes to our soldiers who laid their lives to make our present and future bright. The third challenge before us at that point of time was the availability of food grain. For many years, we were importing large quantities of food grain. And I still remember as a child, we used to stand in a queue to get a little bit of ration. Today, not only we are self-sufficient, we are exporting large quantities of fruit grain to many parts of the world. And that credit goes to our scientists and our farmers. The next challenge was the economic growth. For first few years, we were growing at a rate of 3.5%. Nobody ever thought and never imagined that we would be growing at a rate of 5.5%. And we used to call it Hindu rate of growth. And then we started growing 6%, 7%, 8%, 9 and 9 plus. Even today, we are the largest and the fastest growing economy in the world today. And that makes us the darling of the entire world today. But if we look a little deeper, we find still a large number of people are below poverty line. They do not get even $1 per day. And these numbers are about 450 million. And if we had to take care of them, we got to grow at a rate of almost 9 or 10%, but that alone is not sufficient. This growth has to be inclusive. And to make it inclusive, it is very necessary that we create jobs and jobs and jobs at every level. And initially, our focus was primarily on the service industry. But the problem with the service industry is that the service industry is confined to largest towns and metros. And we cannot ask people to migrate from the smaller towns to bigger towns or from the rural areas to urban areas. That process is going on. However, we got to create jobs in every nook and corner of the country. And for that, it is necessary that we pay attention to the manufacturing, and this is what the new government is doing. Through the Skill India, Digital India, Make in India, all these efforts are in that particular direction. Now let me come to why India is an interesting place for the industry to invest as on date. Again, there are 3 Ds. First is again democracy, and democracy means it's a government for people and by the people. Second is a rule of law, and that rule of law and the provision in the Constitution gives us freedom, the liberty, and we can live with safety and security anywhere in the country. The second is demography. We are one of the youngest nation in terms of demography, and as the ma'am was saying, that we can take advantage of this. And about 450 million people are in the age range of 1 to 19 by 2020. And this group can become an engine of growth, but that will be possible only if we are able to impart good quality education and good quality skills. It's a very, very big challenge, but it's doable, and we are moving in that direction. And then comes the third D, and that is demand. As you know, India is a huge country, 1.2 billion people. And secondly, is a highly pluralistic country, multi-ethnic, multilingual, multi-religious. And we had been not only moving ahead, in spite of all this diversity, and moving in a very, very positive direction. And third, IT industry. The revolution in the automobile industry has shown that we have got the capacity, and we can become extremely capable if the environment is conducive. And for that, now I come to your question, sir, that what we are doing. When we are talking about Make in India, when we are talking about creating jobs, it is very necessary that we create an environment where young boys and girls are able to set up their enterprises very quickly, in a very hassle-free manner, and successfully. And they should be able to run those units successfully. And labor laws play a very, very important role in that. Today we have got about 43, 44 labor laws, central labor laws. It becomes extremely difficult for any entrepreneur to take care of these 44 labor laws. So we are replacing these 44 labor laws with 4 labor codes. And replacement is not a mechanical exercise. Idea is to take care of the reality of the today's world. Many of these laws were created way back in 1926, 36, 46, and 70s. These are not in sync with time. Because of the technology, there has to be a change. And this is what we are doing. First, we are trying to integrate. Second, then we are trying to simplify. And wherever possible, we are trying to infuse technology so that life becomes easier and simpler, not only for the entrepreneur to set up their enterprises, even for the enforcement agencies for the compliances. Secondly, many a time there is an issue, workers versus the enforcement agencies or the entrepreneurs. But I personally feel that there is a convergence in their objectives. No entrepreneur would like to put people behind any other objective. People are at the focus, at the center. What do they want? They want basically 3 kinds of securities. One is the employment security, second is the wage security, and third is the social security, and we are working on that. That does not mean that they should have the permanency of the job. When I talk about the employment security, that means when they are not required and they are being dehired, they should be able to acquire new skills, they should be able to take up job elsewhere, and during that period, they should have enough money to sustain their life and to take care of their families. And this is what we are proposing in our labor laws. What we are saying, that there will be an ease of hiring and dehiring, but at the time of dehiring, they will get a very attractive severance package so that they can take up another job. And secondly, as Mr. Bhargava was saying, we are also trying to look into the Contract Act, because contractualization is a reality today. Because of the globalized economy, it is very necessary that we must have the flexibility in hiring. Whenever there is a demand, we must hire. When there is no demand, we got to de-hire them. And for that, we are trying to bring in changes in the Contract Act without compromising on the rights of the worker. And this is a little tedious journey. It's a little challenging journey because of the competitive unionism. Unions do not like any changes in the labor laws, but we are confident and sure that we will be able to overcome that resistance and we'll be able to make it a success. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you. As you said, the workmen and the unions who represent the workmen, they would demand for fairness. They would demand for a social security. And I think fairness and social security also helps the society to be more stable and the market to grow, right? So that's a reasonable demand from the employees and the unions. At the same time, in a very dynamic, competitive world, the employers have a reasonable demand that they should have a sufficient flexibility to adjust the nature of work and also perhaps the quantum of people employed for work in their enterprises. So there's a dilemma. It seems sometimes difficult to reconcile these two. And you're leading to, I think, the requirement for innovations in institutions which can fill the gap, as it were. Our present forms of institutions are not able to reconcile these 3 points of a triangle: flexibility, with fairness, and with social security in them. So we heard in the morning session about how the idea of a staffing federation, professionally run, well-regulated, which honors the needs of both the employer and the employee, could be the solution. So you're one of the founders of staffing federations here, Ashok. How would you say the essence, how would you describe the essence of what you do in, and that essence addressing this dilemma that we have?
So, I think this should be okay. So, largely, all of us in the staffing industry are very monotheistic, religious zealots. We pray to one God, jobs. That's really the key focus areas. And if you really look at it from the Indian context, the challenge is more structural. We have 50% over 50% employment in the agricultural sector, less than 13% in the manufacturing sector. The element of the relative contribution to GDP changes substantially, and over 30% of the employment is outsourced. While globally, that's 5 to 15%. In the Indian context, out of that 30% outsourced employment, only 1.5% plays to the formal space, which is the staffing industry in a manner of speaking. So 98.5% being informal is a bigger challenge. As one leader said, I don't care whether the cat is white or black as long as it catches the mice. The challenge is not really whether it's a temp job or a perm job, but informal versus formal. And that is really where the staffing companies come to play, because they effectively become the clearinghouse to the job market. They match the element of demand and supply. They remove the element of information asymmetry and create an element of access to candidates to the formal job market. One key challenge that we keep talking about is we have a large population, but employability is a challenge in the population. They have the degrees and the certificates, but people don't have the skills that the industry is asking for. But our feedback to that is learning doesn't just happen in the classrooms. Learning, and especially skills learning, happens a lot on the job. And that is really where the aspect of the staffing industry being able to create those first-time job opportunities for individuals to learn on the job, and also for these kids to be able to earn while they're living. And that's a huge benefit with the economic strata and the large volume of people that we are addressing. Because these are not long-term jobs, these are not lifestyle choices for individuals, but it's an opening balance on which kids are able to build their future on. And I think that opening balance becomes a huge benefit, especially when we are talking about the large volume in the Indian context. It was earlier stated that we're the only country growing younger, we are adding 1 million people to the workforce. we will, over a period of time, become the workforce of the world. And that is a reality that we are going to have to be looking at and addressing. And from that perspective, I think staffing companies primarily play to volume and scale. They have an execution capability, they have scale competencies, invest in technology, and are effectively able to address a larger element of the volume, which is the challenge we are looking at from a structural perspective. I think also, if we really look at it, in the longer term aspect of addressing it from an organized play perspective, staffing companies really approach the whole element as flexicurity. There is flexibility aligned with the element of security, because at the time of employment through staffing, it is all formal. The elements of benefits, the elements of adherence to labor laws, the elements of aligning with the element, the drive of the government, aligning with the interests of the individual and the companies work for the staffing companies. And at the end of the day, all of this play that happens to address the individual interests are done at no cost to the candidate or the associate. And I think that is really where the ability of the staffing fraternity to come together to become a solution to the problem and address the element of a transition from informal to formal and skill development really kicks in from.
Thank you, Ashok. You said that the learning takes place not in the classroom, but by doing real work, the actual work, by doing that. In our skills discourse in the country, where we want to train, say, 500 million people, we are going about by saying, well, how many fitters will be required, how many machinists will be required, tailors will be required, beauticians will be required, and then working backwards and saying there's going to be a long process of the finishing to become a tailor, before that learning something back into school even, 6-7 years. By the time a person who started on that journey to become, at the end of the day, something, a machinist, the world has changed completely. So there is a dilemma here that the present method that we have of putting an assembly line to produce skilled people may produce a lot of people who find no jobs at the end, because the jobs will be very, very different. So it seems to be that more people learn on the job, and as the job changes, the industry changes, they keep learning. So that brings me to Henry Ford again, Henry Ford. Henry Ford said, after he had created that very successful enterprise, but he was beginning to have industrial relations problems. And then he complained. He said, why is it that when I want just a pair of hands, I get a whole human being? Now, he was missing the point that the human being has the aspiration to learn and to learn new skills. And if all you wanted was just a pair of hands, and by the way, I would say, I've seen in our skill discourse, people who are in the skilling side saying, they're asking industry, what do you want the hands to do? That particular operation, I will train a person to do just that. No nonsense after that. Now, Mr. Bhargava, as you know, you have grown a culture in your company in spite of the culture around yourselves not always being very conducive to support your values, I would say. So we have had recent times, and you've also suffered in Maruti, where people have said, well, the people on the assembly line of Maruti don't feel they're treated like full human beings. They don't get understood, and their needs are not understood. They have to do certain things in a certain time and so. So there is a culture that creeps in of efficiency, of the worker being a cost. There are workers seen on the revenue side, squeeze the cost. If I can't sell more, get the worker off. Contract, get him off, so my revenue is managed. But we are saying here that the worker is on the balance sheet. He's an appreciating asset. In fact, your machines will not improve their capability, their own capability. Certainly the buildings won't and the land won't. The workmen can improve their own capabilities. Therefore, Henry Ford should have wanted the whole human being and not just a pair of hands in that. How do you find the discourse, Mr. Bhargava? I'm talking on the employer side. Do you find sufficient understanding amongst employers in India of the value of people and of treating them as appreciating assets, rather than demanding that they have means for managing the cost of their people only?
I believe that in that long period of socialism which we had in India, when quality, productivity, cost, none of them were relevant for production, the employers adopted the attitude which you just described. Mr. Ford also said that I just want a pair of hands. And if those pair of hands produce what is needed, what I want out of him, it's fine. We had union agreements which only specified that you will make X number of products in a shift, and after that you didn't have to make anything more. I think it's totally wrong, that approach. My experience is that it's not a pair of hands which we want. It's the mind of the worker which has to be involved in what he's doing. He has to want to do what he does because he thinks by doing it, he is going to further his future. So much more important in the training which we give in our skill development programs and all that. Of course, you have to give him the skills to do a job. But I believe more important than giving those skills is to make him mentally adaptable to understand what is really in his interest in industry, how he will have a long-term benefit, growth, security of job, quality of life, if he believes that he can make it happen in the industry. It also requires, therefore, sir, that employers must exactly do what you mentioned, that they must not look upon workers as a kind of mechanical asset which maybe even deteriorates over time with age. They have to look upon them as an appreciating asset which, with skills and with proper motivation, can do far more than what was ever thought possible. I'll again give the example of Maruti. When we started the company, the government, the Japanese all agreed that to make 100,000 cars, we needed 4,000 employees, 25 cars per employee. Today, the output, if you leave out the component manufacturing, which is a separate activity, we have an output of more than 120 cars per employee. And that's against the 25 which was thought at that time to be an optimum output. In fact, our productivity bonus scheme got approved by government because they never thought we could go beyond 25 cars per employee. But that is the kind of capability which workers have, and it's really the employer's task to get that capability unlocked. And I think if those employers who understand this, who adopt policies and programs which will help workers unlock that thing which is in their mind, which has been taught to them over years by unions and others, that employers are exploiters and you have only to unlock the shackles from the employers and you'll get on. That's all absolutely irrelevant in today's competitive world. You have to be understanding that there is no answer to long-term success for a worker other than making the company grow and become partners, and the employers have to make that happen.
Yes, so it's the education of employers, it's the managers, their attitude and their skills to be able to create that environment in which workers will be the appreciating assets. Talking about India, we I think talked enough that there is, the people of India are the asset for anybody in industry who wants to be here and is here. Yes, the management, whether it's coming from outside or here, better be skilled at using people as the appreciating asset. But when people come from outside, Shankar, and even our internal people say, the problem in India is the unions. It's not a good place to do business. In particular states, it's even worse because of the unions. Now, I know, you know, President Obama is in Vietnam. And what there is the thing? That the US industry is saying that Vietnam better subscribe to the ILO requirements of right to association and unions. And it's interesting coming from the US to say there must be unions in Vietnam, right? And here we find some employers saying, get rid of the unions and I can produce a competitive enterprise. So we need good management, but I guess we also need good unions, right? Absolutely. So how are you managing this between the managements and the unions, the education of both?
Thank you very much, Mr. Maira. India is a very, very complex society, and so is the case with unions. But unions are not very difficult. They are complex to understand, but once you understand them, it becomes very simple. Like Maruti is an excellent example. In spite of all these problems, they had been producing cars in this globally competitive world. And they had been selling now cars to Japan. You see, it's a question of a little bit of cultural issues. Many of these unions were created way back during the British time and soon thereafter. At that point of time, there was a lot of exploitation of the workers. So there is a little bit of legacy. But once you are able to understand them, I think they are not very unreasonable people. They are not very rigid people. Even within India, sir, in last 2 years, there has not been even a single instance of workers' unrest. That shows the maturity at the level of unions. There is no doubt that they'll keep demanding more and more rights for the workers, and that is not bad. Ultimately, we got to strike a balance. And finally, sir, there is a convergence in the objectives of the management as well as the aspiration and expectation of people, workers. And if we are able to manage this convergence, I think there is no problem, sir.
I'd like to now open up to some short questions from the people here. And you could direct your question to anyone here or ask a general question if you so wish. So please just put your hand up, say your name, and ask your question. Can a mic please be given to the two gentlemen in the front, one after the other? We'll take both your questions and then we'll see, and we'll take a third.
Sir, first of all, thank you so much for giving such a nice presentation. And after hearing, once again, we say that we are really a proud Indian.
Your
Mr.
name, sir?
I'm RP Yadav.
Yes, please.
Sir, first of all, Mr. Bhargava started that in 1983 when he started Maruti, and he said that when he had a meeting with the senior people in the committee, and said that we would not like to be like a public sector, you know. And today almost 30 years have passed since, you know. Even after 30 years, when there is a tendering on the staffing, as we know that largest number of outsourced employee used by the public sector, you know. When the tendering takes place, and in the tendering, when we quote, of course, plus the minimum price, minimum wages, and the PF, NESI, and the service charges. But there are certain companies, smaller, they quote even less than the minimum wages. And when the tender is open, the tender goes in their favor. And when we question to the people, the authority, they say, "Main kya karoon?" They have quoted less, and it is L1, so they will get, you know. So my question is to Mr. Aggarwal, to Mr. Maira, is when is that this concept is going to be over in the public sector, you know, that L1 not, because that ultimately exploits the people, you know. They get the less salary, they may get the inconsistent salary, they might not get the statutory benefits, you know. When this public sector or the government is going to awaken, you know, where the largest kind of these kind of things are taking place.
Thank you, Mr. Yadav. Got that question. You had a question, sir? Next. Sorry.
My question is specifically to Mr. C.P. Gurnani. My name is Mehul Shah, and I represent a company called Collabra into IT staffing. So when we talked about IT industry, you know, as we know that in last few years, the industry really grew a whole lot. We started as a country, we started as a utility, which is, you know, cost benefit to the users of our services, IT services. Then it moved to some sort of value addition where we are right now. And we are moving as an IT industry into transformation of the businesses of the multinational giants who are using our services. So now in the whole curve, if you see, we started from utility, which is cost effectiveness, and now we are moving into the transformation phase. So once we move into the transformation phase, how do you really see the employment in India in the next 5 years or so? Because when it came to cost saving and cost effectiveness, obviously, you know, it boomed a whole lot from the employment standpoint. When it moves into the transformation stage. How do you see the employment in the next 5 years? Thank you.
Okay, any other? Or we'll take these two questions. Let's take, there's one here. Yes, please, at the back there.
Hi, good morning. Tom Hadley from the REC. We're the professional body for recruitment in the UK. Interesting to get your take on how employers currently perceive the staffing market and staffing providers. So is there a genuine partnership? So interested to get an employer perspective, but maybe also from a staffing company perspective. So what is the perception of employers?
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to take these. There are three questions here. The first one, which was about the tendering process, you addressed to both of them, and I think you're right. We see, even internationally, that you can buy from a country at low cost. But again, the international norms and the desire to be fair says no, your supplier should be following international labor regulations, for example, paying fair wages, right to organize, and so on. However, the purchasing department of the company buying in America is going to keep scurrying for the lowest cost, right? And so it is true that within our organizations, we have the purchasing department with one set of incentives, and then some other people, the management perhaps, with a larger picture saying that unless our suppliers are using appreciating assets and growing their capabilities, we will not be able to grow ourselves. Mr. Bhargava, I know that you've addressed this point.
Actually, what we decided in tendering anyway, this is just not L1. We have also to look at the capabilities of that person. And I believe the capabilities include the processes followed to produce what we want, because you want consistent processes. So, in fact, speaking for the public sector, I would say that the public sector also has the freedom not to accept L1 if they find good reasons why it should not be accepted, which includes the fact that they find either the quality or the process not appropriate. Most people don't exercise that judgment because it is simpler not to do it, safer perhaps. But otherwise, there's nothing that stops this happening.
I'll leave that. I won't ask you the follow-on question on this one. Mr. Gurnani, CP, I'll come to you last. But I want to talk about the staffing market question that was asked by a guest here from the UK. And I'm going to put that question not to you, okay, but to three of them. And here in their industries, in the manufacturing industry, then I'm going to ask you in your service industry and organized manufacturing, organized service, what do you see as the contributions that the staffing industry in India is already beginning to play, and what more would you expect of them? CP, you want to go first?
So, I think, coming over to flexible staffing, I think the word itself defines that it has to be a partnership. The word itself defines that no organization can go through the sinusoidal wave of the peaks and demands and the troughs unless they have a partner which can help them service different seasons, different markets, different times. And the people who do not partner will not be able to actually take advantage of making a flexible staffing organization successful, or they themselves being successful. Because if my peak demand comes, let us say, in the month of October, November from the retail industry, then it is better that I take those people for October, November, and I, reduce my offtake or reduce my staffing in December when that demand reduces. So if I'm able to work on that forecasting, planning, and execution model, I think it's going to work a lot better for me, because then I can service those demands. Now, it doesn't matter whether this is for application maintenance, it's for testing, or it is for doing an extra shift because certain parts of the market require that extra shift.
Mr. Bhargava, we've talked about contract labor, and it is known now that in manufacturing industries, many of them, maybe 70-80% of their workforce is on contract, including core jobs. Contractors are staffers, aren't they? So it is a staffing industry. So we already have a staffing industry in this country. So what's the difference between what we've been hearing this morning about a staffing company which takes responsibility for things which a contractor doesn't take, apparently? How do you see this? You have used contractors also.
Actually, when I was running Maruti, we did not use contractors for any production-related job. We did use them for peripheral jobs like loading, unloading, packing, and such things. The situation varies from industry to industry. And I think in our industry, it's required that we have a certain amount of flexibility with the workforce to cater to changes in demand, which may or may not happen with any degree of regularity. It depends on the economy ultimately. But what is needed is that people who work in the factory develop skills. And if the staffing organization is able to ensure that the people whom I've trained and who have worked with me, but who have to be temporarily laid off, are available to me when I come back, then it's very useful to me. Otherwise, I have to look for a different pattern because I don't want to lose the skills which I develop in these people. And the second part is that these people must also see that there's a future for them in my industry. Otherwise, what I said earlier about motivation and getting people's minds involved in the operations in which they are working, that will never happen. The problem with contract workers today is, of course, that they are not involved.
CP, I'll take the question that was asked of you, Mr. Shah, in the same context, that when the jobs are changing, and they will be changing a lot in your industry with more technology coming in, you are the person who really knows what the job is going to be. The staffing company cannot know that. So how do you work this out? How could they be a solution to you in a dynamic environment where you got to develop the skills in the people?
Again, as I said, I mean, you cannot universally make one statement or the other mutually exclusive here. So I'll give you an example. Different parts of the market. So for example, in a German or a French market, if I'm looking for a local language skills, if I'm looking for a local interface skills, I mean, I don't have a choice because I need those skills only for 6 or 8 months. I don't need them permanently. If I don't need them permanently, it is best is that as I am putting in a solution for my client, I work with a flexible staffing partner to borrow those skills for 6 to 8 months and plan it so that the execution is flawless. Now, I genuinely believe that in a model which is service industry, which is people-oriented, you have no choice but to work with external partners, which is a network of partners, whether it is for staffing, sometimes for a product, sometimes for system integration, sometimes for only sizing, but you have to work with the ecosystem.
Thank you. Shankar, the last question to you, and this would be, you are at the nub of it. You are at the center at the moment in India. As we said, is the most interesting place in the world if you want to be tapping into energy of human beings to grow a good and competitive enterprise. And it's the only energy of human beings that will create an enterprise. So you're at the center of creating an environment, of creating relationships between different entities to make India the very vibrant place that it has the potential to be, right? Staffing federations seem to be a solution to a problem that we are currently confronting, right? What do you expect of staffing companies?
Thank you, sir. So when we hire people through a staffing agency, we may get people or the employees with basic skills and basic qualification. they cannot give an ideal person to me to perform a particular or a specific job. However, I would expect staffing agency to focus on three things. Number one, all these people must have a commitment and a passion to work in that particular unit. And secondly, they must have some kind of an idealism also. These three qualities are universal. And I would expect that staffing agencies at the time of recruitment must look into the character of each and every person to find out whether they have got the commitment, whether they have got idealism, and whether they have got the passion to perform a particular job. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So in other words, don't just train the pair of hands. Nurture the whole human being, the message to the staffing federations. Thank you very much to the panel. It's been a very interesting discussion, I believe. I hope that all of you found something of interest and use to you. And thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a really well-moderated session, and thank you so much for sticking on to the time. And we would like to present you all with a small token of appreciation, for which may I please request Mr. Narayan Bhargava, Chairman, NSB Group, Kalevich, and Treasurer, ISF, to kindly come on the stage and present our esteemed guests on the stage with a small token of appreciation. Can we please have a group photograph, sir? Can we please have a group photograph quickly? Yes, sir. Can you please all step forward? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. With this, ladies and gentlemen, we now are proceeding for a tea break. But before we do so, I would like to remind all of you once again that we'd love to hear from you your valuable comments. Do tweet your comments on hashtag WEC India 2016 and hashtag Shiat 2016. Well, tea is being served in Mumtaz Hall, and hope to see you all back on time in the next 30 minutes. And post the break, we will be starting with our next session. Enjoy your break, sir.